welcome back. We look forward continuing today with Igeres HaKodesh, the Igeres test, the ninth letter, the ninth epistle of the Alter Rebbe. We had quite a few classes on Ches. Textually, there wasn't such a long chapter, but nonetheless, there's quite a few classes on that Ches, on the 8th chapter. Tes is relatively a shorter Pedic, very poignant demands of the Alter Rebbe, or the Alter Rebbe demands, again, in the context of Tzedakah, yet once again, and a poignant presentation, for sure, in this chapter Tes, in this Igeres Tes. We did mention quite a few times that in the Igeres HaKodesh, besides the fact that it's a distinct in the other segments of Tanya, of the Sefer Tanya, we know it has 5 segments. We repeat it periodically, especially for the newcomers. There's 5 segments of Sefer Tanya. We merited to conclude the first 3, and we're into the 4th, the 9th Igeres. But there's a distinction between the 2. The first 2 are sequential, Pedic after Pedic. There's basically one idea, of course, divided into different segments, not formally, but nonetheless, there's different ideas conveyed. You can definitely group different chapters. For example, Kuti Amorim, which is the length, which has 53 chapters, as an example. Nonetheless, you learn Tanya time and again. You see ultimately the connection between every single chapter, from the first all the way to the 53rd. And then when you have, because again, it's a segment which there's the connection between one chapter and the other, and so too Sharich Lemuna, and so to Igeres HaTshuva. Sharich Lemuna is the presentation of the Alter Rebbe, the unique and inimitable presentation of the Alter Rebbe regarding Achdus Hashem, the oneness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Sharich Lemuna, that was that first formal presentation of the Alter Rebbe, presenting the idea, what does it mean, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. Then Igeres HaTshuva as an example on that, one most central mitzvahs and significant mitzvahs of all mitzvahs Hashem gave us is, of course, the mitzvah of tshuva, which reconnects a yid to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We can appreciate why Alter Rebbe has the whole segment about this mitzvah of tshuva, and again, with that unique presentation of the Alter Rebbe, encapsulating the entire mitzvah of tshuva in Igeres HaTshuva. There's 12 chapters in each, but again, every chapter follows the other, as opposed to when you're talking about the Igeres HaKodesh, the letters of the Alter Rebbe. Of course, you say a letter. It's written to a community, or to even few communities, or all the Alter Rebbe's Chassidim and followers. Eventually becomes a timeless message for the entire world. It becomes part of the Sefer Tanya Kadisha. But nonetheless, it was written addressing a certain issue which the Alter Rebbe felt he had to strengthen and encourage and so on. But yet when you learn the entire Igeres HaKodesh, you do find a common denominator, or you do find this a thread of a spirit of the mitzvah of tzedakah. The spirit of mitzvah of tzedakah is very much accentuated and emphasized and underscored. Even though you do find certain Igeres that the Alter Rebbe doesn't mention this mitzvah at all. Teda, Tefillah, and so on. I don't even think the word tzedakah comes up. The word even tzedakah comes up in them. But in the overall, no question. You learn the Igeres HaKodesh is 32 letters. Alter Rebbe wrote many letters, but this made it in to the Sefer Tanya, again with maximum precision. And becomes part of the Sefer Tanya Kadisha. But when you learn all of the Igeres, you do find the spirit of tzedakah, or the mitzvah of tzedakah, the spirit of the mitzvah of tzedakah coming into the fore, because there is a backdrop to it. Besides, Alter Rebbe was underscoring this mitzvah, which we know that it has an advantage over any other mitzvah. The Alter Rebbe himself explains it in Pedic Lamed Zayin. It's a click away. We just did mention wherever you're watching this. There's always the advantage of the original website, tanyaonline.com, which the advantage is, firstly, it's easy to follow. the class. The text is in a separate scroll bar, as well as all the previous classes, all the segments we learned. You get such and up till now. It's all lined up on the left side of the screen, easy to access and easy to find as we cross-reference from time to time, based on the information that we're learning. Teira, Anim, Malkim Echad, Ashirim, Malkim Echad. Sometimes something is mentioned with brevity. Sometimes maximum brevity is explained and elaborated in other places. And if we learned it, we just point out the chapter, and it's really easier to click away within a few seconds. You could be at the place where this concept is elaborated. Sometimes Alter Rebbe himself cross-references and points out, this is explained and elsewhere, and of course we mention it. So that's Tanya Online, this original website. And so when you do learn all these Igeres, you can see as the Alter Rebbe is underscoring this mitzvah. And again, we did mention from time to time, as we were just saying, there is a backdrop to it, which you do also periodically mention, that the Alter Rebbe was campaigning for for a Mendelhood Docker, which made that famous Aliyah with his Talmidim, with his Chassidim. They were going through a very difficult time, extraordinary difficult time, and they lived in Tveria a bit, and in Tzfas and in Tveria, but it was something, it was really deep in grave poverty they were experiencing. The Alter Rebbe was appealing to his Chassidim to send significant funds to assist them, and the Alter Rebbe was very successful. Interestingly, this became the basis of, I'm not going to go into it now, what others, the opponents, had something to hold on to. The Alter Rebbe was sending money to the Turkish government, which of course, as Yisrael was then under the empire, the Turkish empire, but of course the Alter Rebbe was heavily supporting Mendel Haradoker and his students. So we did say, again, we say in additional, on top of the emphasizing the mitzvah of tzedakah on its own, besides this idea of tzidkas eretz Yisrael, which you find it time and again, where the Alter Rebbe speaks about tzedakah, so much of these chapters are focused not only on the mitzvah of tzedakah, which we mentioned earlier, as we started mentioning, that we find it in Perek Lamed Zayin. Alter Rebbe writes how the mitzvah of tzedakah has a edge over every mitzvah, every single mitzvah in the Torah. Mitzvah of tzedakah has, it's not only based on the effort of man, which this is the nature of man. He would do many mitzvahs. It comes to tzedakah. It's a different ballgame completely. But Alter Rebbe says what stands behind it, and what does a person accomplish when he gives tzedakah. You can see it in Perek Lamed Zayin, the 37th chapter in Likutei Amorim. It's a click away. Perek Lamed Zayin. Alter Rebbe explains so beautifully why the mitzvah tzedakah becomes a centralistic mitzvah throughout the entire Torah, even in comparison to every single mitzvah that we do. But here Alter Rebbe also underscores this mitzvah in all these, many of the Igeres HaKodesh. Again, it's definitely a common thread between the Igeres and the Igeres HaKodesh. Yet, even though there's certain letters, certain presentations of Alter Rebbe over here, which doesn't even mention the mitzvah tzedakah. So in this Perek, as an example, the Alter Rebbe comes to very strong, very poignant in his demand for tzedakah again, and points this out again through the lens, of course, of Teres Achsidus. But you see over here, especially the new prints over here, also this idea of tzadikim sheberetz Yisrael, kedmin tzadikim shebechutz la'aretz. Of course, he's referring to the Mendel Haradoker and his followers. So let's begin. Perek Tes, Ahu b'yachai v'reyai asher kenafshi. My beloved, my brothers, my friends, like my soul. Alter Rebbe, it's interesting. Alter Rebbe writes his Igeres in such a personal and in such a personable, deep heart connection with his followers. And it comes into words. Alter Rebbe, of course, wasn't just poetic and trying to write this in this poetic manner or in this setup of a letter, the formal setup of a letter, trying to, as he's demanding from his people, to come in, amicably in his writing, the beginning of the letters and the end of the letters. The Alter Rebbe writes that you chassid is beloved to me, and as a brother to me and a friend to me, like my soul. Person's soul is the closest to the person. That's the energy, especially someone who was a vibrant soul like the Alter Rebbe, and someone even before you're talking about the Nefesh Elikis. The Alter Rebbe was all of the Alter Rebbe was a Lukus, of course, but even before you talk about Nefesh Elikis, the Alter Rebbe's soul was besides being an neshama chadasha from the perspective of the original nefesh elikis of the core of the nefesh elikis or the nefesh elikis of the Alter Rebbe being the neshama chadasha, but not even talking about the high spiritual plane levels which the Alter Rebbe was, who he was before even he obtained his knowledge and his piety and so on, and ultimately becoming the tzaddik of all generations. We see the Alter Rebbe writes kinafshi. It's like my soul. I love you, my beloved, my brother. It calls the people who he's writing to, which is Nashas Talmidim. At the end of the day, every yid, my beloved, my brother, my friend, Asher Kinafshi. As much as I close to my soul of the Alter Rebbe, and again, even before introducing the Alter Rebbe's neshama, as we know so much about, which is written Alter Rebbe's neshama chadasha. Pashit kinafshi, like I love my soul. My soul is the most precious thing to me because that's what gives me life. That's what gives me energy. That's what gives me vitality. That's what gives me function, and so on and so forth. It gives me life. That's the source of my life. As much as I love life, as much as I like my life, I consider I have that same connection to you, the other party, which I'm writing the letter to. You become my ahuvi, my beloved, my brother, my friend, like I said, Asher Kinafshi. This is so telling, and of course, talking about the Alter Rebbe, he wrote it. Besides, he meant it, but he put it in words. Tells us how close a Rebbe Bechlal is with his Chassidim, and when the Alter Rebbe writes it, especially someone like the Alter Rebbe, when he writes it, it's not like I'm standing up there, which the Alter Rebbe was standing up there, and all of us were standing down here in comparison, of course. But the Alter Rebbe did not approach his people in that manner. He wrote it in this fashion, but namely, this is the way it was. I'm close to you. I love my soul. I consider my soul the closest to me. So too, I consider you, Chassid, in the same fashion. You're my beloved. You are my beloved. Collectively, of course, you are my beloved, my brothers, my friends, and of course, ultimately individual to every single yid, to every single follower, to every single person who reads this letter, which is in the end of the day, Tanya, the Nachos HaKlal, every yid identifies with Teres Chassidus, which in the end of the day will be every single yid. Alter Rebbe himself says Chassidus is not to a particular party. Chassidus is Nachos HaKlal. Bosi Kimaskir, in other words, the Nachla, the inheritance, in other words, it becomes part of the message which is pertinent to all Yidden. So the Alter Rebbe said, Bosi, he says, following these words, Bosi Kimaskir U'Me'eri Yishenim, I came as a reminder and a awakener of those who are sleeping. Betardemas Havle Havolim, in the sleep and slumber of the vanities of Elam Hazeh. The expression, of course, Hevel Avolim, comes from Shlomo Melech. Shlomo Melech says, Hakel Hevel. And he also writes this 7 times, the word Hevel, in the beginning of Kehelis, which in the end of the day, Shlomo Melech is saying, as an introduction to his message, or many messages, that in the end of the day, it's all vanity. It's if we connect to something meaningful, we connect to something of significance, which of course to a yid is connection to his creator through Torah, mitzvahs, and like the Shlomo Melech concludes the entire Kehelis, Seif Davar Akel Nishmas Alekim Miravas Mitzvahs of Shemar. In the end of the day, it's about fearing God and guarding His mitzvahs, and the rest is vanity. So, as we navigate we're on that the odyssey of Elam Hazeh. Our neshama invested in body, and neshama invested in animal soul and in body, and well anchored in Elam Hazeh, we could fall asleep, so to say, in the sleep and slumber of the vanities of Elam Hazeh. We don't have to explain this, so we're going to go on. And Alter Rebbe says, I'm coming to wake you up of that. And to open up the eyes of the blind. Yabitu lires, they should be able to gaze and to see. Lires kol yisham focus and see lias kol yisham v'chafetzim megamosam. They're all their desires, all their aspirations. The chol bahem chayi rucham b'mikir mayim chayim chaya chayim kol yimei chayim. That it should all be in the source of life, which is the life of all lives, the source of all life, literally translate chaya chayim, the life of life, which is the source of all life. It's of course HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That should be the focus, and not to get lost in anything else. Which part of the vanities of Elam Haza established that it could be something independent of Chas v'Shalom Elam Haza. It's not that someone would say overtly, yes, there's something independent than HaKadosh Baruch Hu, or there could be a life stream or blessing or anything happening at all independent of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. No one would formally say it. Be silly for somebody to stoop to that level to formally say something, because the average Yid doesn't speak like that. But nonetheless, we so act like that many times. This is part of the conquering, so to say, of the Hevel Havolim of Ilma Haza over us, even as Yidden is Frumi Yidden, and something's very Frumi Yidden. Yeah, I needed to stay a little longer because it may come another few dollars, even though there's a tzibur waiting for me, or I'm supposed to be at that minyan, or I'm supposed to be at that shir. And if you come 10 minutes late to a shir, so one comes late 10 minutes, why do you come late 10 minutes to a shir? Because he thought that extra 10 minutes is going to be beneficial for me. So one way or another, we're identifying with the Hevel Havolim, with the vanities of Elam Haza. In other words, we're saying that in the end of the day, that plays a role in my success, because I waited there, I exchanged, I substituted the coming on time to the classes, to the Torah class, or to davening with a minyan, with something that I felt that is going to work. But in the end of the day, Hashem says that of course, there's sometimes when a person plans, he has to meet a certain, there's always exceptions, and not always we could identify, or not always we are meant to rely on any even formal exception. That's why we need guidance. He needs a Rav, needs a particular Rav to tell him when things could be done in a certain manner. If there is exceptions, maybe there is no exception, but we're talking with conceptually, or generally speaking, when Hashem demands that the minyan is supposed to start, but Yid has to be prepared. And even the Gemara says there's something special about the first 10 people walking to shul. Just a general example of a shir or a minyan, and someone says it, especially they do it time and again, they say, what is that? What is that saying? Then in the end of the day, Hashem, which is the source of blessing, Hashem is the source of life, and He is the one who He gives you the ability to exist, to live. He gives you all the brachas. He gives you koyach lasas chayil, that energy to produce, to be strong, to bring about that success. And in the end of the day, that same Eibishter is telling you, come to minyan, and come on time to minyan, say every word, remove anything which is the before and after from the time and place and focus of your davening. Meaning to say the time and of your davening, leave everything, the before and the after, away as much as you can. Namely, one of the things, close up and come to minyan. If it's mincha, if it's ma'ariv, if it's shachris, as an example, coming on time, or to a shir and Torah. Hashem wants a Yid not only to learn Torah, but wants him to come on time to shir and Torah. You shouldn't miss out. So when we prioritize other things, what are we saying at the end of the day? That there's validity, there's value to that over HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is standing there and demanding, learn Torah, do mitzvahs. And again, there's multiple examples, just giving a general example, that even though we would not say it, but sometimes we act and we say, this is also something which is going to bring me success, despite the Eibishter, which is telling you clearly. And if you look at Shulchan Aruch, unequivocally, the idea of coming on time to minyan is an example. And He is the one who gives you all these brachas, and in the end, you, so to say, work around that. And you say, no, I have to stay a little longer, because that's going to give me the bracha. But the Eibishter is saying, no, the bracha comes from here. Here is the center, and here is where all the brachas come from. and therefore it's important that you do what the here says, which is the Shulchan Aruch, which is the word of Hashem, as an example. Again, many examples. So the Alter Rebbe, and this is part of one falling asleep and getting caught up with the vanities of Elam Hazeh. Not advertently, but even inadvertently, in the end of the day, a person falls asleep. Sometimes a person falls asleep without even knowing. He's so tired, so he falls asleep. This is the idea. We can fall asleep in the Hevel Avolim of Elam Hazeh. Alter Rebbe says, I'm coming here to wake you up, to open your eyes, that all your aspirations should be in the source of life, the life of life. And when should you focus on the source of life, which is HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Chayei HaChaim? Not on a particular day, in Kippur, Rosh Hashanah, or any special day of the year, or times when you're preaching to others, but no, you as a Yid has to have this around the clock every single day of your life, every single week, in other words, throughout all the span of all time. Every time of the year, month, week, day, hour, minute. That's all. And in every area of life. Not to someone say, when I'm davening, I'm going to focus on HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But when I'm doing other things in the 24 hours, which are not directly associated with Shulchan Aruch and Halacha, or I'm not doing a mitzvah at that time, not learning Torah at that time, so then, I will identify with this which I'm involved with, not only identify in action, but in my whole focus, and perhaps establish that as a independent source of blessing or source of comfort. So everything, minefesh, should be focused on the chaya chaim, minefesh ve'ad basar, from soul matters to flesh matters, which in the end of the day encompasses the entire 24 hours of a Yid. That a Yid has to know that there's only one mokir, there's only one source. The source of bracha, and the source of life comes solely from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Hainu, the Alter Rebbe specifies over here, kol mila da'alma basic parnasa, that all worldly matters, and all engaging in parnasa, which means in the well-being, the parnasa, which we're all involved with a significant majority of our day and of our life, which is called the Esika Parnasa, the occupation of bringing in a living, meaning to say, establishing our source of income via a particular job, which becomes the Esika Parnasa, as we know. Again, it takes up by the average person a significant majority of his day, which ultimately is a significant majority of his life. So all these mili da'alma, all worldly matters, which the Alter Rebbe is saying is not only Parnasa, which is all, when we say worldly matters, the person is eating and drinking and engaging in world affairs in every possible manner, which is again, of course, permissible and is needed as a Yid lives in Elam Hazeh, neshama invested in body, and of course there are the bodily needs, but these bodily needs are called mili da'alma, and one's occupation of making a living. He should not be like those who do for themselves just more money and to the intake, in other words, to gather, to assemble for myself, not in a vicious manner, not in a malicious manner, but nonetheless, the focus is on myself. I'm making a living for myself. That's the average human, that's the nature of the average human being. For that matter, it's inherent in the human being. There was once a famous, I'm talking about once, it's been a while, but it's a present-day famous philanthropist, and he in the end became a Frum Yid. He's talking about a multi-billionaire, actually from Ukraine, and he was the keynote speaker at one of the big kinusim assemblies, and there's a lot to it, but just the one line which I'll never forget. He said that till I identify with the mitzvah of tzedakah, and you could even say till he became closer to Yiddishkeit and identify with Torah mitzvahs, he said, I never understood what does it mean you're taking your money and you're giving it away. Money is something you put in your pocket. In his words, almost verbatim. It's not you take from your pocket and you give it away. Money is something you put in your pocket. You accumulate for yourself. When I started becoming frum, and I started identifying with the mitzvah tzedakah, and he said, just not to waste time, he said, that first, I think he said, the denomination of $10,000. The first $10,000 was the most difficult denomination of money that I had to impart with. In other words, imparting with that 10,000 was a difficult move I ever made in the context of tzedakah. He says later I gave millions, which is famous that he gave tens of millions of dollars of tzedakah and built up many beautiful maesters. He was responsible for building up many beautiful institutions in the tens and tens of millions of dollars. And many said it. They said the rest wasn't as hard as the first $10,000 he had to take from himself, because it was a game changer. It was a mind shifter for him, meaning to say it was because this is the way the world is. Money you bring in, you accumulate ligarmayu for yourself. So Dal Rebbe says lo yikaelu. That's not what a yid is all about. The abdin ligarmayu, to do for oneself. V'lo beis Yisrael kechalagayim. The house of Israel should not be like all the other nations. The zonin and mefarnesin that sustain and provide for their wives and their children and their own family out of love. That's the Chol HaGoyim. Now, not to say, as Alter Rebbe himself says, that there's a concept of Torah, according to Torah, that one has to provide for their children, for their wife, and so on. But it's a difference if you do it following the mandate of Torah, but if you do it with that inherent nature which exists, which is part of human nature, and if you do it as part of human nature, it's of course so distinct and so different in the context of what you're ready to share with others. If you're doing it because Torah tells you, Torah mandates you to provide for your wife and your children, it's different than you do it the way that, like the Alter Rebbe writes, Kichol HaGoyim, that they just focus inwards and their whole accumulation of parnasa is to provide and to sustain their wife, their family out of love. And of course, there's the natural love a person to have a wife and children and so on, and therefore they provide lovingly to their wife and children. Says Alter Rebbe, no, ki mika amcha ki Yisrael gai echad ba'oretz ksiv, that who is like your nation Israel, a one nation in the land, end quote, says the pasuk, and you see the pasuk adds in the final word ba'oretz, in the land, meaning to say, to know that we are a unique nation, that we put on tefillin and we sit in the sukkah and we eat matzah and we fast in Yom Kippur. That's not what the pasuk is telling us. Ki'im ke'amchi Yisrael ge'echad. Of course, we're a one nation, constantly demonstrating the oneness in HaKadosh Baruch Hu in so many parts of our life. For that matter, Yid does it throughout his entire life and on a daily basis. He wakes up, he doesn't go to the workplace. He goes to shul, puts on tefillin, davens and connects with his Creator, and then natalis and tefillin, and spends time meditating in prayer, learns a shir in Torah. So of course you see right away the distinction of Amcha Yisrael, the nation of Israel, which is a one nation, which is demonstrating in that morning, for example, the oneness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Yid says in the morning, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, while someone who's not a Yid doesn't do that and goes straight to, their own. Again, the workplace, because this is what the average individual does. So the pasuk says, "Who is like your nation, Israel?" They're a one nation, demonstrating and identifying constantly the oneness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's great, but the pasuk adds one more word, ba'oretz. They're not only on a spiritual plane, on a lofty spiritual plane, which is the idea of prayer, meditation, tefillin, tzitzis, sukkah, fasting, Yom Kippur. No. In matters of oretz, in the most material, mundane matters of life, there we see the goy echad, the distinction of the yid and the non-yid. As the Alter Rebbe continues, the gam behind the shegam inyani oretz le'afridu me'echadam is even in earthy matters, literally translated, worldly matters and mundane matters. They should not differentiate, or they should not part. They don't part from that oneness of truth, and that's what makes the Yid so distinct. Perhaps from a certain perspective and point of view, more than all the other things that he does on a spiritual plane. Now, of course, when you say in a spiritual plane, it's not exactly in a spiritual plane, because the Yid is always, it's his body which is identifying with prayer, tefillin. In other words, his body and even his nefesh bahamis, for that matter, that's the whole point of prayer. That, as the Mishnah says, that a person has to established that love to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, not only with his godly soul, but with the animal soul as well, meaning to say, as the Pasuk says, V'ahavtas Hashem Elokecha b'chol levavcha, as the Mishnah says, in the Yetzer Hara should love HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And of course, when a Yid comes to Shul, everything about him comes along and davens and meditates and appreciates the words and the sensation of prayer. Or the person puts on tefillin, everything about him is involved in his performing that mitzvah, or putting on the talis, or eating the matzahs, or sitting in the sukkah. Understandably so. But we're talking about in comparison to, you're talking about the simple worldly matters, as in the example that Alter Rebbe gave, the purpose and objective of one going to work and making a living and bringing a parnas and bringing bread to the table. In comparison to that, of course, that would be the tzad haruchni, the spiritual side of the Yid, while this is the oretz, the earthy side of the Yid, the mundane, the worldly side of the Yid. And Alter Rebbe says that this is what the pasuk is underscoring, that Yisrael goy echad, where they are one nation, ba'oretz, that even binyani ha'oretz, they don't, they make sure the oneness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is demonstrative even in those areas of Aretz as well. That's what makes the Yid so special and so distinct. So the Alter Rebbe continues, Chas v'sholom lo yirei d'sheker, Chas v'sholom b'krish me'erev aveikin b'nayim zguras Hashem echad, b'daled ruchis b'shamayim mimal v'oretz mitochas. That it should Chas v'sholom not be in a way that a person, when he's davening, which here you see the idea, this experience of davening, where the person, again, in comparison to Inyani Aretz, would be considered he's on a spiritual plane, and there he is demonstrating so passionately, Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, and he closes his eyes. We know we cover our eyes by Kriya Shema for the one and only reason, because this is a very the most important statement which we establish throughout davening, which is meant to incorporate the spirit of this message, is meant to incorporate into our every part of our being, as the lashon of the Mishnah, even in the Bahamis, even the Yetzer Hara, is supposed to identify with this message of Hashem Echad, das ve'ahavta, to establish a true, genuine love to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and that's meant to capture our entire 24 hours. That's supposed to have an impact, an imprint, and incorporate itself in our 24 hours, and therefore we cover our eyes, that we should have the maximum kavana, and to establish that truly we have Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, that Hashem is our God, Hashem is one, and as the Mishnah said, and as it's brought down, the Gemara says the ches is the numerical value of ches is 8, which is the 4 sides of the world, the 7 heavens and the earth, and the Dalit, which is the numerical value of Dalit, is the 4, which are the 4 corners, the 4 sides of the world, that we established that Hashem Echad, not only somewhere on high, Bashamayim Imal, on a higher plane, but everywhere Hashem's Echad, the Hashem Echad is about the 4 corners of the world, it's about heaven, it's about earth, it's about the entire world. The world in its entirety are part of that oneness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that's the message which a person proclaims every single day, with closed eyes, with maximum meditation and penetration and so on. And that's the way it's meant to be. So when he's davening to Hashem, he's testifying, he's formally testifying. And with closed eyes, the maximum concentration, Hashem Echad. And then he opens his eyes. And of course, Alter Rebbe is not talking about those few seconds. You open your eyes, you're continuing. And to the contrary, you're climbing still the rung of prayer. We know Shemoneh Esrei is even a higher level when a person stands with that intimate closeness with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, precisely in Shemoneh Esrei. But Alter Rebbe says generally, you're opening your eyes, meaning to say you start landing from that experience of davening. You come down into the realities of Elam Hazeh. And then it's a different story. And then all of a sudden, your eyes are not catching this which you yourself proclaimed and identified and demonstrated so vividly and so poignantly, so emphatically. Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, not only Bashamayim Imal, but Haaretz Mitachas as well. Zayin Ruchis. Is the Dalit Ruch, is the 4 corners of the world, and the 7 heavens, and the Aretz. Hashem is Echad, is not, when we say Hashem Echad, it doesn't mean there's only one God, and there's not 2. That's not the message of Hashem Echad. Of course, that's true independently. But we say Hashem Echad is that everything is part of the oneness of Hashem. There's nothing else other than the domain of Hashem. And this physical world, if it's a table, if it's a chair, it's all part of the manifestation of the oneness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that everything is part of the oneness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And then what happens after davening? You open your eyes, you come down, so to say, to reality. And then you go do all your other things, what a Yid is meant to do. Of course, we're talking about something which is meant to do and demanded from you. As an example, to make a parnasa, to make a living. But the spirit which captured you at the time of davening, which you invested so much at the time of davening, is completely faded away and gone, and then you go out to Olam Hazeh in the same fashion as the non-Jew or somebody who didn't daven that day, who didn't proclaim Hashem Echad that day, and you see the similarity, and Chas v'Shalom, we're not doing any, you're going to work as an example. The Alter Rebbe speaks about Parnasa over here. If I mention again Parnasa, because the Alter Rebbe uses this as an example. Ka'elu da'avdin l'gamayu, mefarnisin, zonin u'mefarnisin. In the context of Parnasa, everything becomes the same. And of course, we're talking about a Yid and a Frumi Yid, that he follows the halacha, anything pertaining and associated with Parnasa, stealing, cheating, and so of course we're talking about a Frumi Yid, but the approach, the focus, the goal, now I'm making a living. This is about me. Alter Rebbe writes in this Chas v'Shalom. In other words, what happened with all your inspiration? It just flew by, and now it's gone. And therefore we have to establish that when we say Hashem Echad, or this is what the pasuk is underscoring and emphasizing, that even in matters of Oretz, we should not lose focus even for a moment, and all our occupation and worldly matters should not be for ourselves. Rather, we have to stay alive. And why do we have to stay alive? In other words, sometimes you do the same thing, but you're doing with a different focus and a different approach, with a different goal. Of course, the outcome, the ramifications, or the whole lifestyle you live, your whole approach with Parnasa is distinct and so different, and has an effect, of course, in this which you do bring in. How much are you sharing with others? Because your focus, even to bring the Parnasa home, as the Alter Rebbe says, is because you have a mandate of Torah to bring bread to your table. Why? Because the Eibishter put you down over here in this world with a mandate to learn Torah and do mitzvahs, ultimately to establish for HaKadosh Baruch Hu a dira b'tachtenim, a home and abode for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So therefore, in order to do that, one has to live and one has to be healthy, and therefore, in order to be healthy, one has to eat well, and one has to live well, meaning he has to have a roof over his head. And so too, his family, which he's responsible for, those children also have their mandate, the same mandate, to grow up as children, Yirei Hashem, Lemdei Torah, God-fearing Yidden, who learn Torah and conduct their life based on Shulchan Aruch. Ultimately, again, they have the same mandate to establish this dira b'tachtenim, this dwelling place for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So you have a responsibility that they're looked after, and so to a wife, that they're looked after in a way that they could continue to do what they have to do. Lahachis nefashis chelkei lukus, because the godly soul is dependent, as it sits in Elam Hazeh. The godly soul, of course, on its own, doesn't need to eat or drink or do any other of the things we do in this world in order to sustain ourselves, in order to live. The godly soul is beyond that, but because the godly soul invested in an animal soul, in a body well anchored in Elam Hazeh, the body needs to eat, the body needs to drink, the body needs the comfort of a home. So therefore, you do whatever you have to do in order to make that happen, and make that happen, of course, comfortably. But what's your focus is lahachis nefashis chelkei lukus, because the part, the chelik elokah mimal, which is your neshama, in order that it should be able to sustain itself and be able to live healthily in Elam Hazeh, because it's invested in a body, and the body needs to eat, and chas v'sholem, if the body doesn't have what it needs, to the far extreme, of course, then there's the parting of the nefesh, the godly soul, and it goes back to its source. So, after a person leaves this world, the neshama, chas v'sholem, nothing goes wrong. The neshama is never. The neshama doesn't need. It's not dependent in what it, in essence, with the needs of the body in Elam Haza, but nonetheless, it's only when the neshama parts from the body, Taka does not need all the parnasa and all this which we bring to the table via making a parnasa. But because the neshama has to live, it has to live in a healthy manner, and in order to live in a healthy manner, so I have to make sure to provide this neshama with food and board and so on. That's a different focus. As Dr. Rebbe is going to say, when we have that focus, of course, when we accumulate money, once we establish that we're living basically well, and our children are living basically well, and we have a home, and then I have a choice just to overly or to extend the pleasures of the body in Ilam Haza, or to take this money and give it to Tzedakah, of course I will do the latter and not the former, because the whole reason why I'm going out to work is not just to accumulate funds and to share it with those who I love. Rather, and fill their deficiencies. This is what they need, b'chesed chinam, with baseless kindness, which means in this case, when one says, why Zal Rebbe says b'chesed chinam, is because when one goes to work and so one has a family, at the end of the day, he's providing for others. Now those others are not really others, they're their own yetzich halatzeim, it's their own children. And in the end of the day, even a wife, which is not the blood relative, but nonetheless it's a one unit, but in reality, your identity on your own, your children are their own identity, and your wife is another identity, and you're providing for them. So there's a chesed chinam, there's a kindness, even a chinam, literal chinam means free, meaning that you're extending yourself with kindness to these other parties, and you're meant to, and it's demanded from a yid to do it, and the yid has to do it responsibly. But the focus of the yid is a distinct focus. And when we do so, when we act in this way, we equate the creation to the creator, meaning to say that Hashem, this is ultimately what Hashem is doing, and he's doing it constantly. All day, every moment Hashem is doing this chesed chinam. He's extending his kindness to a world that if HaKadosh Baruch Hu would stop providing for the world even for one moment, as we learned many times, underscored in Shaykh B'Emunah, of course explained or rather elaborated in Shaykh B'Emunah, it's not like there's a world and Hashem drops some chesed here and there. The reason why the world exists is just because Hashem is extending his kindness every moment. Because if Hashem pulls back that kindness, the world will not just decay, or everything will disappear. If Hashem does not provide his energy for that tree or for that stone, for that matter, every moment it would totally disappear, become nothing, turn into nothingness, as no thing at all. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu, every moment when you see the world, you see the ongoings of creation, even this very physical world. There's Rebbe writes, there's Ein Sof Eilumus, and then we know there's the Eilumus Shalamayla, Yitzira, Bria, Atzilus, and so. But even when you look at this world, it's Chesed Kol Kol Hayom. It's a Chesed of Emes, meaning to say Hashem is not really asking anything in return. To the Yid, he's asking in return, but the way he created the world was he created the world, and he's Mahava Mechayim Mekayim. He's constantly giving life and energy into a world, and this, of course, is a Chesed Shel Emes. He's not pausing before he's extending his Chesed and saying, you know what, one condition, I'm going to give you life if you do so and so. He's constantly providing Chesed. How do we know? We see a world exists, and a happening world, and the sun comes out, and the moon at night, and the stars, and the trees, and everything's growing. the entire world in all different levels, the inanimate, the tzemeach, the chai, between the botanical world, the living world, and of course the human beings, the every moment. It's a extension of every millisecond. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is extending himself with chesed chinam, with gratis kindness every moment. So the Yid emulates his creator, and he does the same. That from the very beginning of his life, in other words, when his life is established, and he builds a family, and he goes every single day to work. So what is he doing? He's equating himself to his creator, because every day he comes up with a certain amount of money in order to put bread on his table, in order to provide for his family, for his wife and children. So that's chesed chinam. So when a person does it because this is his, this is what society does, and much of society, yes, does it responsibly, and they provide responsibly, and they extend themselves amicably to their families and their loved ones and so on, which is appropriate, of course. But when the Yid does it in that manner, he could lose focus, and in the end of the day, it's all about me, my family, my children, and those who I love, and therefore I'm just going to constantly expand on this which I provide for them, and I'm going to invest more, that I can gain more, that I can accumulate more, that I could live better and have a better time in Elam Haza, and make sure they have a better time in Elam Haza. That is losing focus of the perspective of Torah on the whole phenomenon of Parnasa. Parnasa, according to Torah, is that a Yid, and this is the way the way the Yid has to focus on a constant basis. And again, the Alter Rebbe adds this idea of chesed chinam, that additional to this focus, the person has to know that in the end of the day, he is equating himself to his creator. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is chesed kol hayom. It's chesed shel emes. He's not asking something immediately in return. And lahachis elam mamloya, he's providing for the world and everything in its entirety. And so too the Yid does on a daily basis, because a Yid's involved, as we mentioned before, it's a significant majority of his day, becomes a significant majority of his life. So chesed chinam, he emulates his creator. But before that, the Alter Rebbe says, what is the purpose of doing so? Why am I extending my chesed? Because I have a mandate. I have to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And it's impossible to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's difficult, a person to learn, for example, if he's a Gemara, if he's hungry because he doesn't have bread on the table. So he goes out to work, he brings bread on the table in order that his nefesh alikis should stay well anchored and healthy in Elam Haza, in order to learn Torah and do Hashem's mitzvahs. And so too with my children and with my wife and my family. And that, it doesn't mean that the person, instead of going to work, he's going to the base of Medrash and asking HaKadosh Baruch Hu that the money should come through the window. No, not at all. In reality, on the ground, he's doing pretty much the same thing. But because his focus and his goal for the Parnasa is with this objective, and solely with this objective, the result, the consequence, the result of that is by far from one extreme to distinct and different from one extreme to the other. Because it's about me, again, that I accumulate, and it's all about myself, my family. Of course, I'm always looking to expand that. And what about the other party? Let him get a job. Let him do the same. And what if it's difficult for him? What if he's not managing? What if he has other limitations? We know that Am Yisrael tzarchei merubim tzarchei amcha. And tzedakah becomes the foundation of Beis Yisrael. It becomes the most significant mitzvah of all mitzvahs. But how can I part from money? Inherently, and again, you see it, that many people are mahadir mitzvahs. They're very careful mitzvahs. When it comes to tzedakah, not so. Why so? If it's a mitzvah in the Torah and you're looking for the best pair of tefillin, the best mezuzah, and the best kosher symbol on that product, and so on, why when it comes to tzedakah don't we act in the same way? Why don't we look for the mahadrin mina mahadrin, which means to extend themselves graciously even more than the norm, or even reach up to the norm? Why is it so difficult? The answer, because naturally and inherently, money is something that we believe that belongs to us. We like to accumulate money and share it with the people who we love. And when we go down in that direction, there is no end. It's all about expansion of self. And when we change focus and we understand that yes, Hashem wants us to go to the workplace and join the workforce and make money, make a lot of money for that matter. But our focus is that we should be able to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to have our nefesh halikis healthy, meaning to say that that the body is looked after, in order that the nefesh halikis could play out in that very body, in the nefesh habahamis, that it should be a conduit to the Ratzon Hashem, to the desire of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And if it's me, and by extension my family, and even my extended family, or my wife, my extended family, and that's the only reason why I'm trying to make it, and I am successful in making it. And of course I do everything according to Torah to make it, first of all, to the honesty and integrity in the business itself, or b'chalal, a person makes himself a keli to the birchas Hashem by davening, learning Torah, and doing it carefully, coming on, like we mentioned before, coming on time to minyan, which is so precious by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is the only source of blessing. He is the chaya chayim, which is giving you the success in that very day. The client should come into you, and it should not walk by your place and go into another place. And so too, shiurim l'imidat Torah, and doing everything what I have to do, and giving tzedakah for that matter, is the greatest keli for birchas Hashem. When my focus is on that, of course, that's a game changer. I do what I have to do, but if the people are in need, I'm constantly, my focus is equally on them, because the whole reason why I'm working is for a godly purpose, and that God is telling me that one of the most important mitzvahs is to look after those people who are in need, and give tzedakah, and give a lot of tzedakah. We look forward to continue. Bez Hashem, have a wonderful night.